You don't want to be defined by the worst thing that's ever happened to you, going forward in your life. So there is some regret within me about doing my Apollo about that thing. But like everything, it's nuanced, because there's also a part of me that is really celebratory and happy that I was able to do it as well.
I made a joke to my fiance the other day, but I was basically like, I just want to make it really clear that if you turn out to be a paedophile or sex offender, I am leaving you. Hi, welcome to Secrets Worth Sharing, a series all about having practical and approachable advice on talking about childhood sexual abuse, but with serious joy. I'm Sophia, a survivor and a designer, and this episode is all about child sexual abuse and humour. And for that, I'm joined by wonderful stand-up comedian, Jonny Pelham.
Hello, it's really lovely to be here.
Thank you. So, who are you? Why are you sitting on this chair?
Well, I'm a stand-up comedian who has written a show about the experience of childhood sexual abuse, which is a lot funnier than it probably sounds. And I think humour is a really fascinating and important way that we can talk about this sort of very serious subject. And I think it really mirrors what this podcast is about, which is about finding joy in the darkest places. And it's why I'm really excited to come on and talk to you.
Thanks, Hon. I thought it'd be quite nice to start by talking about how we kind of met. I was at a wedding, and one of those weddings where you don't really know the bride and groom, you're like the plus one, Anyway, I was chatting to the guy next to me. I was like, oh, who are you? He's like, I'm Ian, I'm a comedian. Oh, who are you? What do you do? And I was like, oh, I'm a child sexual abuse activist. And normally that kind of like stops the conversation dead in its tracks.
It's quite bold to say that at a wedding. Most people are going for small talk, and you're like, this is what I do.
Yeah.
Deal with it, bitch.
Exactly. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm a child sexual abuse activist. And then normally people stop chatting about it, but he went, oh my God, that's so interesting. Someone I know was doing a set about it for Live at the Apollo and was asking my feedback on a set about child sexual abuse. And it was really weird because as a friend, my natural instinct was to want to affirm him and say it was all okay. But he wanted me to let him know how funny I found the jokes about his abuse.
Yeah.
And he was like, as a friend, it was a really weird environment. So we got talking, and then I thought, oh, whatever, I'm just gonna message you, see what happens. And that's led us to chatting on the sofa.
It's great, isn't it? It's amazing the way the world works.
Yeah. Then I started to watch a bit of the set that I could see online, which I think, by the way, is hilarious.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. And it was just so nice to see a conversation on child sexual abuse in a refreshing and humorous way, because I think so much of what I try and do on this podcast is serious joy. So yeah, of course, we're talking about serious topics, but we bring the joy, we try and make it lighthearted, we try and make it hopeful, we try and give practical advice. And it felt like you were doing a similar sort of thing.
Well, I think so. I think there's an idea that, if you're going to talk about this subject in comedy, it trivialises it or undermines it. And I just really don't think that's true. And there's no other art form where that would be seen as the case. And I guess for me, I just write personally about my life. And when I started writing that show, I just gone to therapy about it. And it was very present. And there's so much humour, mainly in how much it sort of fucked me up. But then that's funny. You know what I mean? Like the bits of ourselves which are not perfect is where comedy resides. And so it just felt very natural. It felt like I didn't know what else I'd talk about if I wasn't talking about this abuse, because I was going to therapy about it, I was thinking about it, I was trying to change the person. It felt very natural as a topic for comedy. In the same way, I've just got a diagnosis for ADHD and right now I'm talking about that. This similar thing, just this is what's happening in my life, this is what I'm going to talk to the audience about. And it really connected, which was really amazing.
When you were starting to think about putting the show together, were there any topics that you were like, this is a no-go for me, or how did you put together the actual set?
I built it by jokes a lot of the time. It sounds obvious, but so, for instance, after the abuse, I was sexual, I was 25, because just the anxiety around being touched and things like that. And then during February, thought I want to have a sexual relationship. And so that was a big part of the show, was me trying to start dating as a 25-year-old virgin who's never had sex. You know what I mean? And with a history of child abuse. And there is humour in every bit of that.
Yeah. And
so you just start writing about your lived experience, which is me going on dates, struggling to talk about this thing, having to talk about it, having sex very bad, all that stuff, which was just what I was living, just became the source material. And then I think what happened very quickly is you realise the social political implications of talking about the abuse, which are, this is a topic we absolutely don't know how to talk about in society. I like to write shows which are personal, but through the personal become political. And that was exactly what I tried to do in this show, which is this is my experience, and actually me talking about it in this way and allowing other people to have these sorts of conversations is an important thing that we need to try and do in our society.
When you said, 25-year-old never had sex before, even that I can imagine would have been quite a whoa, what moment for people, because I think so often when we think about experiences of sexual abuse, people are like, oh, well, whether or not the sexual experience was unwanted or abusive or non-consenting, it still adds to your sexual history. And I think just reframing that narrative as well feels quite bold, especially to do via comedy.
I think so, and I think comedy can talk about things in a way that no other art form can. I keep calling comedy an art form and I'm feeling a bit of a wanker, but I'm going to say it is an art form.
It is an art form.
But, and because it doesn't have to take things seriously. It's so true in politics. In politics you have to have David Cameron and Starmer, or whoever talking politely about the world. Whereas comedy can go, these people are fucking idiots. And there's a truth to the fact that they're fucking idiots, which is unsayable.
Yeah.
And comedy can do that around issues of child sexual abuse too. It can say, these are some really fucked up things happened, but they happened to me, and I don't have to sugarcoat it in polite language. I can just express how I felt. And then the great thing about comedy is when people laugh, it's connecting. You know what I mean? So I think I'd really struggle to write a play or something, because I like the fact with comedy it's really immediate if the audience resonate with it or not. Because they either laugh or they don't laugh. And when they don't laugh, you go, this is too far.
Yeah. Did you ever have that?
Yeah, quite. I've got a very dark sense of humour. I thought a lot about my abuse through the lens of trying to make it funny, which turned it into a technical skill, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So a lot of the times I was trying to make bits of my experience relate and humorous, and that was where I could think about that thing. There was a practical intent I was trying to achieve. Like
it was a problem to work through.
Yeah, I was trying to solve the problem of how do I make this thing funny, and that meant I had to think about that thing a lot.
Did you, because I feel the same when I set up Secrets Worth Sharing, because so many people were like to me, are you okay? This is probably going to be a really difficult period of your life. It's probably going to bring up a lot of the abuse. But for me personally, I felt like it was a problem to solve as well. My biggest stress is about where the money's going to come from and where I'm going to get speaking events and that kind of thing. I'm not necessarily processing the abuse in that way. And I think it's because you have to reach a certain point with your abuse in order to be able to talk about it publicly in the first place. And that's in so many ways. It's a personal thing. It's around whether or not people around you know and the sort of support you've got, and if you're ready to be vessel that receives other people's disclosures and all of that kind of thing. So I feel like I'd already dealt with it in a way that I was comfortable enough to be right, this is me.
Yeah.
And now how am I going to turn this into a business?
Yeah, I think I'm very similar. I went to therapy for about a year. And I was completely in denial about the impact of it. I described it as a thing we did together. I never thought about it. Complete avoidance. Then went to therapy. Went to therapy for other stuff, really. Just, dissatisfaction with my life. Started talking about it for a year in therapy. And then it felt now this is what I need to talk about. And I actually wrote a show in 2018, I think, 2017 maybe, that was pretty shit, where it was talking about the issues I was dealing with in abuse, which was an inability to have sex or the struggles I had. I daydream a lot, I'm quite dissociative as a person. I was trying to talk about all the things in therapy without talking about the abuse. And so it just didn't have a grounding that made sense. And so I fell back on I'm a middle-class English person who's bad at sex with women. And, so there just wasn't, the reality wasn't there. The abuse was the context that was necessary to explain who I am. And so one of the decisions I made in the show was in the hour-long show, I talked about the abuse within the first 5 minutes. So I say I had sex when I was 8 with a man who was acting very immorally. And it's a way of going, we're in this now, because everything else in the show needs that context. Once they have that context, I as a person make sense to them, and the journey I'm on makes sense.
How did that first show go down?
Well, so the first time I did it, I'd do it in little 5 or 10 minute spots around London. And I think one of the things I had to be very clear about was my presentation of the disclosure. So when I told them, I had to do it in a way that they were aware that I was okay. So one of the big things was me saying, I had sex when I was 8 with a man who was acting very morally. And unless I know somebody's going to freak out, I really understand that, but I am going to talk about it for the next hour, so strap in. So there's a way of just going like, this is what's happening, and I'm okay with it. And that would reassure audiences most of the time enough that they would then come with me on the journey.
It's funny because regardless of humour or not, it feels like when a lot of people do disclose their abuse, it's always thinking about, okay, how is that other person going to respond?
Yeah. I think that's so true and almost impossible to change. But I couldn't agree with you more. It's one of the hardest things about telling anyone is that you then have to think about how they're going to deal with it, particularly the people you love the most.
Absolutely. And also like what you've got to be in that moment, right? Are you a child that needs to reassure a family member or a parent that they didn't fail you?
Yeah.
Are you a friend that is trying to support someone else who's going through a difficult time as well? Or are you a partner? Or are you looking to date? Are you trying to, to reassure them that you're not broken or that sex is still possible or an option, or, explore those kind of things?
Hugely. I think that's so true. Actually, that's why when I decided to do Live at the Apollo about it, one of the things I really wanted was to be able to sort of have this conversation in a way that someone could watch that on the TV and go, oh, that happened to me.
Yeah.
And it because it's so tragically common. Every profession, everyone will know someone who's been sexually abused. And so just to have the conversation in a way where it's very matter of fact, this is what he did to me, these are my jokes about it, and leave, it was like, hopefully, allowing someone to say it to someone else in a similarly matter-of-fact way, without that person thinking they're gonna, like you were saying, just freak out, basically.
And it also, what you've done and what I think was so powerful about the show is you've enabled people to go, oh my God, did you hear about that comedian who did a 1 hour set about the fact he was sexually abused? Like, that opens up so many conversations and questions in itself.
I think, and that's what's great about what you're doing. It's exactly the same thing of putting this into the mainstream, this idea that this is happening to people and they can have chats about it. And, neither of us are crying right now.
No,
you know what I mean?
What a win!
But I think that's, like, when you watch documentaries about it, and, like, true crime things are all about it, they want people to be crying and they want people to be emotional and hugging and talking about how it fucked them up. And actually, there was a place for that. There was a need to heal and a need to do all those things. But there's also a need just to chat about it and go, yeah, it happened to me, happened to you. I'm able to live a happy, functioning life now. No,
thank you. And the thing is as well, what I find quite funny about the whole child sexual abuse situation is obviously not what happened to the person and the experiences they went through, but actually the way other people respond to it.
Hugely.
Yeah, that's why I'm doing this whole show, because it's like, actually, yes, the thing happened, yes, it was very dark, but actually the worst thing for me was the way other people in life, especially loved ones, responded to it, and just laughing at the joke that, like, as a society, we can roll around a nonce joke like no tomorrow, but we can't actually talk about how funny it is, how ridiculous it is.
So much of my comedy was that. I was in an Indian restaurant and I told one friend, and he just handed me a samosa he was about to eat.
What, no words?
Yeah, he was just panicked. But it was exactly that thing of just someone, like, people can't deal with it.
Yeah.
And so much of the humour is that. Exactly that thing of, talking about a taboo topic and then you see people freak out. Like, now, I'm not really talking about the abuse in my comedy at all, really, because it feels like I'm sort of just in a different space in my life. It's fascinating to go back and re-remember almost, like what it was like, and just the idea that it isn't this it doesn't have to be this life-defining experience. And you can do other stuff, you can talk about it in your work, and then you can move on to something else.
When I was setting up the platform, someone said to me, are you sure you want to go live with it? And they said it completely, like, in a place of care, innit? But they were like, you will forever be known as that girl that talks about childhood sexual abuse. And I'm fine with that, because obviously, like, my stuff is slightly different in that I want to encourage people to talk about it more and set up, like, a community interest company around it, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I was, like, aware that was what I was going to. But I think the very fact they were asking me that question is in itself why I want to do it, because it shouldn't be this huge thing of like you disclose it and then you're brandished forever, because actually the reality is like 1 in 4 people that we know about have gone through this experience.
It's unbelievably common.
Yeah.
And I had that a bit, and I still have that a bit. There's a part of me that regrets doing my Apollo about the abuse for exactly the reason you're saying, in that I think it makes you, that's my USP for not much of a horrible word, and how limiting that is as a comedian. And that's why now I'm just writing about other stuff. You know, you don't want to be defined by the worst thing that's ever happened to you, you know, going forward in your life. So there is some regret within me about doing my Apollo about that thing. But like everything, it's nuanced, because there's also a part of me that is really celebratory and happy that I was able to do it as well. But I really understand that, of not wanting to be like, I'm the child sexual abuse comedian.
And I think it's so important to talk about that regret as well, because I think we forget that people who have these conversations, like, it is so tiring, because you're using your experience as material. We both are in different ways, but it's also incredibly personal. And then I think as a result of that, talking about these things in a joyful way is quite rare. At least I feel a sense of duty or responsibility to people who then disclose what has happened to them to me. And I'm not trained to do that. Obviously I can share and educate and share my own experiences and the things I've learned on this journey, but I'm not a therapist, I'm not any of those things. And it's almost like there's the Sophia of Secrets Worth Sharing, who like walks down the street, and then there's also like Sophia, the Croydon Hun, who walks down the street. So I just don't know how the two marry.
It was the worst thing about doing the Apollo, was people talking to me about their experience of abuse in settings like a pub, when I was out with mates. Because you're right, you have incredibly intense conversations with people when you're not in that headspace at all, and you just have to flip a switch, and there's a duty of care you have towards that person who's disclosing this information. There's a duty of care to yourself to figure out how much do I give this person. Because of the way I spoke about it, I think I got a lot of people talking to me who had never told anyone, or you know what I mean? And so there is like it would be immoral. Well, I decided it was immoral to not talk to them. It was bigger than I realised it would be, in terms of the amount of people who reached out to me. It wasn't even people who reached out to me, because when people reach out to you online, you've got time to go like, right, I've got an afternoon, I will respond to these people, and you can get in that headspace. It was when I was out, you know, with mates, having a good time, 3 pints down, you know, when you're just completely in a different headspace, and then someone would say, oh, I saw you on Live at the Apollo, and my heart would sort of sink. And often they'd just be saying, oh, I liked it, or whatever. There was regret for me there about what it does just to your life to talking about it so openly. Because if I'd done jokes about, you know, other jokes I could have done, people would just say, oh, I like you, Apollo, and then they'd leave. You know, and it wouldn't be the same level of conversation, I guess.
And I think until it becomes such a commonly talked about conversation, you are going to be a bit of a spotlight example. And there does hold some duty with that. Like, I agree. When you were prepping to do your first show, or at least to do Apollo, was any of that in your head?
Not at all in the way it should have been, really. So the show, like in Edinburgh, the show was in a room with like 60 people. The scale's so much smaller. And then you get right after Edinburgh, I did at the Edinburgh Festival, you get Apollo tells you who they're picking. And Apollo said, we'd like to use you. And you've got 2 weeks to get your 20-minute Apollo set together. And so I had to break up an hour show into 20 minutes, and then gets edited to 7 minutes and 12 minutes.
Wow.
So it very quickly, again, became a technical exercise of like, what of this show works as a 20-minute standalone bit. What I started grabbing is all the bits that are the funniest. But what I think about my Apollo, and again, this is another reason I feel regret about it, is the political points and the nuance you can say in an hour. And even the nuance you can say in a room, like there's something so flat about Live at the Apollo. You know, not in a negative way to Live at the Apollo, but just about seeing stand-up on TV. You know, people are watching it, eating a curry, they're not invested. And so it's such a different experience for the audience. And so I was sort of so wrapped up in like, shit, I've got Apollo, this is a dream. Shit, I need to make this hour 20 minutes, 7 minutes, blah, blah, blah. That it sounds sort of crazy, but the after effects of that many people, you know, a million people hearing about my abuse hadn't even really occurred to me.
You were just busy living your dream.
Yeah. And I was like, right, and then afterwards I was like, oh, this is sort of mental.
I'm really interested to know what you think about like prepping an audience for this kind of material. For example, like when you watch a film and they're like, okay, be aware there's going to be nudity, strong scenes of sexual abuse, that doesn't really do anything to prep me.
Yeah.
Like for example, my triggers are going to the countryside, the Queen, Scrabble and pink silk pyjamas. Like no one's going to be like, beware, there's the letter Z in Scrabble coming up. Do you know what I mean? So I'm just curious to know how you think about prepping an audience for this kind of material and how it's currently done.
You know, I honestly think this is an area where I haven't got a firm opinion and I can see both sides. On the one hand, I feel there's probably a duty of care to people coming to the show to let them know they're going to be extreme topics that might be triggering and difficult for them to hear, particularly around child sex abuse if they've experienced it. Mm-hmm. And also, it's very difficult to get people to come to a show when you tell them it's about child sexual abuse. We used some language which didn't say this is about child sexual abuse, but we said this is like a difficult show with themes of... I can't quite remember the language. But what are your thoughts on it?
Quite similar. All I know is that pre-warning audience now, I don't think currently works. First of all, the people who most need to hear about talking about childhood sexual abuse aren't going to be the people who are actively looking for it. Yeah. So I think you need to like normalise that conversation, make it a bit more light touch, casual, dare I say. And then the other part of me is like, yes, but there are some elements of triggering that can happen. But for me personally, those have happened in like action films or I don't know, thrillers or whatever. Like it's not a film where I've gone knowing that it's going to be about childhood sexual abuse. And as I said, the trigger for me, like my worst triggers are the things that I said, things that no one could possibly know would be linked to abuse. So I just don't know how helpful it is, because sometimes it can like categorize a conversation and people have already brought their biases in.
I agree with that. And the thing about my show was it was very matter of fact, and it was never, there were some very dark jokes in there, he said, remembering one particularly dark joke. But there was nothing that was about the abuse happening. And there was political bits, and there was a bit where I say we need to talk about this more. And there's a bit about me talking about how I cried when I saw some 8-year-olds and realised that's how young I was when I'd been abused. But there wasn't like, it was all delivered quite conversationally. I think my show, although I am biased about this, would have done more good than it would have done any harm through people who have not thought about this, who have experienced this, hearing it and seeing me talk about it in the way I talked about it. But I am biased about that.
No, but you know what? I'm so happy because I think you put yourself in quite a vulnerable space when you go public with it, when you do the comedy. So I don't know, to hear that you had an overwhelmingly positive, as in terms of the reception or feel you have, that's good to hear.
It was really very positive.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing is like, it's what you interpret as comedy. Do you know what I mean?
Totally,
like, when I've had a long day, I love to go home and watch horror and just watch people getting bashed about. Like, I'm not trying to say, but it's my idea of a release. But I guess if comedy for you is your idea of a release, that could take so many forms. And for some people, it's cat memes. And for other people, it's joking about their child sex abuse.
And Live at the Apollo, it was a bold decision by Apollo to do it.
Yeah.
Because it isn't what the audience were expecting they were going to get. And so there's just a jarring there that might have led people to have a negative reaction to it.
Yeah. And I think that's what's nice about it, is that you can wholeheartedly say it was a group decision in the sense that like you got asked, you put the set together, there was a whole team behind it as well. Which then leads me quite interestingly to your Channel 4 series that I think came off the back of that, wasn't it?
It came off the back of the Edinburgh show.
Okay.
And so they also came in and said, do you want to do a documentary about this?
Look at all these opportunities that came from it though.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's great about Edinburgh. I mean, I was about to go on a rant about the Edinburgh Comedy Festival, but I won't, because that isn't what this podcast is. But one of the only good things about it is that you get seen by lots of people who can help you do interesting things with your career. So Channel 4 came and said, do you want to, or well, not Channel 4, a production company came and said, do you want to do a documentary about it? And that was a really great experience too. It was slightly more challenging. The fundamental contradiction at the heart of that documentary was they'd come to see a comedy show and wanted a sort of a comedy, or at least a humorous documentary around child sexual abuse in the same topic, in the same tone that I'd done my show. But I was talking in the documentary to other people who suffered child sexual abuse. And with my own story, I can be as flippant or however I want to tell my story, I can do it. And if humour's the way I want to do it, I can do that. Obviously, when you're talking to about someone else's experience of child sexual abuse, you can't be flippant. It's like if someone disclosed to me they were abused, and I was like, that's fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
Like, it would just be crazy. So basically, I just had to make sure that isn't what happened. I think it was very good. I'm very proud of the documentary. So I think we made it good. But it was just that thing of going, I'm sort of repeating myself, but, I could talk about my experiences I want, but as soon as other people's disclosures or are talking about their trauma, then I have no right to trivialise it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, of course. And I think that's where, like, we talked off camera a bit about responsibility and like when you're making a joke, like who is the butt of the joke and who is telling the joke. And I think you're exactly right. Like, own yourself, own your own experiences. But if someone's coming to you to do a documentary about their trauma or the way that they respond, and you're just sitting there being like, wink to camera.
It was. One of the things about it was that it was so obvious that tonally it couldn't be what they maybe wanted it to be. Because, I remember talking to someone and they were disclosing their abuse, and it would have been jarring, insanely jarring, to not meet that person in where they were, which was they were revealing quite personal, traumatic information.
Yeah.
And so quite organically, actually, it isn't humorous. You know what I mean? Because it couldn't be.
Can we start by explaining to people what it was? Because I'm just aware not everyone's watched it.
Sorry, no one's watched it.
I've seen it! You're one fan.
So it was a documentary series. It's on YouTube now. It's called Let's Talk Child Sexual Abuse, I believe. And there's 3 parts to it. The first part is talking to a survivor about why it's such a difficult thing to talk about and how we can try and make it easier to talk about. The second section was about how we're doing about trying to prevent it and what we could be doing more and how we could go about doing that, which is, insane how bad. Because that's the thing about it being such a taboo, is that it means we can't have any serious grown-up policies about how to prevent it. And, there is nothing more that an abuser wants than for it to be not talked about.
It's literally thriving on secrets.
It has to be.
Yeah.
And the more we're able to talk about this thing, the more easy it would be for a kid to say, this guy touched me.
Yeah.
And that's got to be why normalising these conversations is so important. Because as soon as you normalise them and you allow someone to say without shame, this happened to me, then abusers will be fucked.
Yeah.
And so anyway, the second was about how do we police it, what can we do? And the third one was talking to people who were sexually abused children. Scientists estimate between 1 in 100 and 1 in 20 men are paedophiles. And so that doesn't necessarily mean they offend. And a lot of people who offend aren't paedophiles, weirdly. They just power or whatever, fuck knows. But that's a fascinating thing that you think about up to 1 in 20 or 1 in 100 people in this country are paedophiles.
Yeah.
And then it's like we have to deal with that somehow. So the last part of the series was talking to someone who was attracted to children, but who never wanted to act on it and sort of hated himself, but could never disclose it to anyone because of his shame about being someone who was attracted to children. That was the idea of the documentary, to look at it as a structural thing and go, how do we talk about this topic seriously, in depth, and try and find answers to it.
And that's what I thought was so powerful about it, because you had the whole speaking to survivors, then you had the vigilante paedophile hunters, and then you had the speaking to a paedophile themselves, which just so people are aware, like paedophile means that you have a sexual attraction.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you act on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you act on it, you're an offender. And as you just said, people who offend aren't necessarily always paedophiles. There's lots of reasons why people do these things. But yeah, what I thought was really interesting is, like, sometimes when I think about me, I think I'm quite an archetypal cookie cutter person that comes to mind when you think about somebody who's had, like, gone through child sexual abuse. I'm not saying because I look like absolutely, like, fucked up or whatever, but like
I don't think you are at all. I wouldn't say you are. I think
really?
You're not,
That's interesting. I guess what I mean is that, like, I'm a woman, like a cis woman. I was abused as a young girl by an adult man. And I think a lot of people, when they think child sexual abuse, they think, okay, little girl, older man.
Yeah.
And I think what was really nice about the people that you interviewed in the documentary and yourself is that, okay, here's an adult, a grown male adult, talking to other adult men who worked as survivors.
Yeah.
And then the person who you spoke to, who was a vigilante paedophile hunter, was like a woman, a mum in her house doing it on Facebook or whatever.
Yeah, that was. She was just like a mum who just decided to take it on. But I find it so fascinating about how we police it. And my sort of view is, if you have the thought but don't act on it, then we should try and help these people and support these people. And then as soon as you've acted on it, sort of fuck you, and we should put them in prison for a long time. Is my personal view. But yeah, but it was just fascinating thing to talk to all these experts about it and to try and realise how complicated and difficult. And because what the person who was the non-offending paedophile said is basically he realised he was attracted to children when he was 13 or 14 and went through puberty, and then he hated himself and couldn't talk to anyone about it, and it surely is just going to make him more likely to offend. You know, the fact that he doesn't have any support network. And then, I mean, what that support network looks like and what that help looks like, I have no idea. You know, but it is I guess it's something, if we want to stop this, you have to admit that it's a problem. Yeah. That some people have a mental illness or whatever it is. And if we just pretend that isn't real, then we won't solve it. Yeah,
and I'm so with you on the front of, like, supporting people who haven't offended, who have the sexual attraction to kids, because, and I didn't realise how controversial that point of view was until I got into the sexual abuse, child sexual abuse space, because, like, for example, there's this charity called Lucy Faithfull Foundation. Yeah, so they're like the only charity in the UK that have solely prevented to stopping childhood sexual abuse by working with non-offenders, offenders, like people who have sexual thoughts towards children. And they get, like, death threats, you know, their callers have to have really rigid training about the sorts of hate and abuse that they're going to receive for helping people. But I just feel like our whole system is so stretched. We're only able to plaster up supports to survivors if they can even get it. I mean, there's a million different ways why someone might not want to go through justice or access support or whatever. But, like, on top of that, then we're not getting to the root of the problem. And the silence that surrounds it, which enables it to happen in the first place, which is why we're doing these conversations. But yeah, I guess what I was trying to say is that in this whole documentary, I think the people that you spoke to were people you wouldn't necessarily expect to be so active in this space or having those conversations.
Well, what was remarkable about it is seeing how many people are working so hard in various different ways to try and stop it. Yeah. And I think, you know, whatever your view on the vigilantes, whatever your view on the therapist treating non-offending paedophiles, all of them are coming from such a genuine place of trying to stop this awful thing. And that was because I think you can get into tribes and be like, you know, I think vigilantes are bad, or I think therapists are bad. But if you just go, everyone's trying to stop this awful thing, then from there you can sort of build a coalition of people and try and get somewhere. And again, it is just about talking about psychologically for a nation what paedophilia is at the moment. It's the monster at the door that we go, they're evil, awful people that only the worst people in the world do. And you see it, you know, every year there's a moral panic. There's a paedophile everywhere, and that makes us feel great about ourselves because we're not them. We're good, and all that does is it completely disallows any sort of nuanced conversation or any real conversation about the scale of it and how we go about preventing it, and it just keeps it in these shadows as this mysterious thing that then never gets near a solution. Yeah,
if anything, it makes it harder, right? Because it puts, like, Jimmy Savile, I mean,
100%.
Russell Brand, all of that, like, they're now an us and them kind of situation. And I've seen it, and I remember when I was thinking, maybe I should tell an adult about what's going on, and all these cases were coming up on the news, and the way people in my life were responding were like, oh, well, that would never happen to us, or like, picking apart the stories, you see how society responds by when they're put like these, and also it's always offenders who are put on a pedestal.
Yeah, totally.
Like going back to the nonce joke thing.
Yeah.
Like I don't even know what nonce stands for.
I have no idea.
Basically, it's slang for paedophile in the UK, and like I feel like it's so common in British comedy to joke about nonces and paedophiles and all of that kind of thing. And I think no matter what you think about that, it really holds up a mirror to society. Like, we joke so easily about paedophiles, but not about the way we're responding to sexual abuse. Society is the real joke in this situation.
Totally. And I think it's that we are so scared of admitting that it is family members and teachers and successful people who wear suits and go to work and pay a mortgage who are abusing you, abusing children. You know, it's some crazy stat that I'm actually not going to say, because so much of it is interfamiliar, you know, into families.
Yeah.
And it's like, it isn't monsters.
Yeah.
And that's so much scarier that it's actually someone who, the person who abused me, incredibly charismatic, incredibly well liked, incredibly well respected. And it's these people who are doing it. And we're so scared of that, like you said, we put Jimmy Savile out there and go, these are the people.
Yeah.
And we go, they're the worst people in the world, we need to kill them and murder them and we should never. And actually it's fucking loads of people. And it's loads of people you'll have had a lunch with and had a great time with. And we just, our refusal to admit that. And I'm thinking about having kids with my girlfriend, and processing what to do with a kid, knowing how common it is, will be very difficult for me. Well, it's definitely better that I know.
Of course.
You know what I mean? So rather than just go, it's just evil people who might snatch them, going, actually, there are people out there who I'll know who will probably be paedophile, child sexual abusers.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying, but it's better to know than just to wander around unwittingly giving your children to them. You know what I mean?
And you know what? It's so good that you're talking about it with your partner, because it's something that you're aware about and you're actively gonna have those conversations, hopefully with your kid if the time comes, whatever. And like, I made a joke to my fiance the other day, but I was basically like, I just want to make it really clear that if you turn out to be a paedophile or sex offender, I am leaving you. Like, and that comes from a very like personal place of like seeing what happens when people stay with paedophiles or stay with sex offenders and stuff like that. And like, obviously I meant it as a joke, but like having that conversation really early with your partner and just being like, how do you feel about talking to your kids? Because he was like, I've always seen it as being like children are innocent and you have to protect them and blah, 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 blah. But actually like, you're an example of someone who grew up with that kind of upbringing, but you still got abused. So where do I stand now? And we've had a very active conversation. I think, at least for me, like getting married to someone was such a moment where I was like, right, I want to understand how they feel about this, and this. And you know, he's on board. So yeah. And the way I started that conversation was with a joke.
Yeah. Well, comedy's connection. Yeah. At its absolute core, comedy is a connection between you and the audience, and going, we connect. And that's such a great way to begin any conversation, is to go, we can laugh and smile and joke, and now let's talk about something serious. And I think you're right. I think that idea of kids being innocent is so prevalent, but you can maintain innocence and safety. You know, they're not mutually exclusive. Yeah. You can say to a child, if someone does this, you need to tell me, without saying, because they might do this, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so, I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all, really.
Thank you so much for listening to what we had to say about this theme. Did you know you can also find the longer version of the episode and the do's and don'ts episode in the same place on our website? Just head to www.secretsworthsharing.com/content and you can find all the episodes linked by theme alongside the transcripts, written text versions of the do's and don'ts, and video versions of all of our content. See you there. Thank you for having a difficult conversation with serious joy. Bye.